Let's bring in our Sky News political editor, Andrew Clennell. He joins us live. A lot of focus, of course, at the moment on the Australian-US relationship with the inauguration happening overnight. A lot of analysis and discussion as to what a Joe Biden presidency will mean for us here at home. The opposition leader, Anthony Albanese, has seized on this theme as well today, criticising the Prime Minister, essentially saying that he wrongly pandered to Donald Trump during his presidency. Mr Morrison hitting back there, accusing the opposition leader of petty political sledging.
Yeah, just the start of a very bitter contest this year between those two men, I suspect, Ash. You couldn't get a more Australian press conference than that, could you, with him waving flies away the whole time? Scott Morrison seeking to shore up his support in Queensland. He's able to travel there because he spent some time in Canberra, I gather. Some of his Sydney-based staff weren't able to go on the trip because of these border restrictions, and let's see how that plays out the rest of the year, particularly if we are looking at an election year, as many suspect. This Trump dispute, it's much ado about nothing, really. Anthony Albanese's just had a shot, tried to suggest I'll be better off with the Biden administration, I'm more the statesman, than Scott Morrison, who's tied himself too closely to the Trump administration. Morrison, he spoke in recent days to Mike Pompeo, Mike Pence, but he says he won't be talking to Donald Trump. And he says, I can get on fine with the Biden administration. Thanks very much. I'm the statesman, not you. So that's the extent of that. Almost a one-on-one there with Greg Brown from the Australian and Scott Morrison. There you go. Greg, he says, I never credit him enough on Sky, but a lot of questions there from the Australian to the Prime Minister. He wasn't happy with one, which was Australia going out first on the China inquiry into the origins of coronavirus. Scott Morrison saying, well, we eventually got global support and I'll always stand up for Australia. Yeah, it's a bitter exchange to sort of start the political year between Albanese and Morrison, isn't it? And taking in that inauguration to do so.
Yeah, and I guess the political battle will continue in earnest next month when MPs do return to Canberra. We're expecting vaccines are likely to really dominate a lot of the early federal political discussion this year.
There's absolutely no doubt about that, Ash, and it's been put to me that in around a week's time there'll be regulatory approval for the Pfizer vaccine. That's required before Pfizer will even ship it to Australia. That will be the first vaccine used here. It's also been put to me that it's quite possible there'll be a restriction that not be used on over 80s, and that over 80s then would have to wait for the AstraZeneca vaccine. The first rollout of the vaccines anticipated for late February. That will be the Pfizer vaccine for health workers and the like. The obvious restriction, or the suggested restriction, on over 80s using the Pfizer vaccine comes, of course, after the Norway experience. Still a general belief that it's not related, the deaths there, to the use of the vaccine. It's simply old age or pre-existing conditions, but they're not taking any risks, the federal government. And there are people in the federal government saying to me today, well, you know, we're copping these calls to rush it out in an emergency like other countries with far bigger outbreaks. Imagine if we did that and the Norwegian thing happened here, what we'd be copping. Caution is really what they're about. They're going to wait for the technical advice. The Prime Minister called it today in an interview with Ray Hadley, the umpire's advice in terms of when to roll out the vaccines from the Therapeutic Goods Administration. Should be from late February, but that regulatory approval for Pfizer, I'm expecting next week.
Yeah, and it sounds like the cautionary approach will be the best one in order to inspire public confidence in these vaccines, which is going to be also important as we do see the rollout get underway. Andrew, on the economic recovery, we heard from Scott Morrison there, the mining industry back up and running, did pretty well during the pandemic in terms of keeping the Australian economic engine going. We've got really something of a two-speed or multi-speed economy, though, going on. Some parts of the economy is still really struggling to get back on their feet. We've seen these calls for a so-called hospitality keeper, JobKeeper scheme to continue after that scheme is due to end in March. And you've got some exclusive details about what's likely to happen in that space.
Yeah, well, JobKeeper won't be extended in any form in March. That's not the intention of the government. And that's despite correspondence from Restaurant and Catering Australia to Josh Frydenberg, the Treasurer, suggesting that for their sector, for troubled parts of their sector, do continue. Josh Frydenberg had a bit to say on this a day or so ago, and Scott Morrison again this morning. The PM saying we can't just run the economy on government money forever. Have a listen.
Given the positive growth in job figures, will that mean that you definitely end the JobKeeper payment in March?
Well, I've made it very clear that JobKeeper is legislated to the end of March, and it's our intention for the JobKeeper program to end there. It's been a remarkably successful program.
We can't run the Australian economy on government money forever. It's all taxpayers' money. It's all debt, and it's got to be paid back. And so we've got to be very careful with how we deal with these programs. They can't just continue, endlessly. We'll keep looking at the information.
Now, one of the considerations around JobKeeper and extension, Ash, is that this feeling that you discourage some people from applying for jobs, going to work if they can just get the JobKeeper payment, and that employers have had that experience. Another, which people in the federal government aren't talking about, but which could also readily apply, is the fact that JobKeeper props up economies, allowing state governments to keep their borders closed. I actually made it to Western Australia this month, Ash, and I noted a story in the West Australian suggesting that JobKeeper be extended for Western Australia. They've got to be joking, is my point of view on that one. If they're going to continue those harsh border policies, they shouldn't be subsidised in terms of that.
Yeah, well, that'd be an interesting discussion to be a fly on the wall between Scott Morrison and Mark McGowan on that one. I think you're right. There's no hope of that for the West. Andrew Clennell, appreciate your analysis. Thank you for that.